I've turned that on. So the meeting is recorded, and I would ask all of you to accordingly. You have control over your microphones, you have control over your video. So if I see anybody that's causing background noise, I may mute you. Please don't take it personally. I'm just trying to make sure that the focus is appropriate. Please be warned, the chat session is also recorded, and I get all copies of chats. So please keep all of that stuff entirely appropriate, and be aware of that. The discussion will be monitored by Deanne and myself, and we will look and call on you. So you have a choice in terms of questions and answers. Questions live, I would ask you to raise your hand. I'll call on you. I'll try and sort of sequence that as best as I can. You can also just put it in the chat, and if you don't want to speak up, that's fine. Or if you happen to be in a circumstance where that's difficult to do, feel free to use the chat. We'll be monitoring that as well. And then at the close of the meeting, if we've got some spare time, we can have some general chat. But otherwise, I'm going to hand over to Jim and allow him to just give us any brief housekeeping or any introductions. I think David may not be with us. So Jim, anything you want to add to that whilst I get us online on Facebook live streaming?
Okay, I am unmuted, I believe. First of all, hello everyone, welcome to HealthTechNet, and thank you very much for being with us. I am really excited about today's topic, and it's, some of you may have seen a note in this morning's Wall Street Journal talking about the investment climate for healthcare companies. So we've landed on something that I think is really timely. We've got a really good panel, and I'm looking forward to hearing them. David Main just sent me a text with an apology. His oldest daughter is expecting her child to be born imminently, and David has been on grandparent duty. I think he's right now en route between New York City and Delaware. So he may come on later, but we may not hear from him today. Just a minute or so, or a note or two about upcoming meetings. As per our tradition, we're going to do the August meeting as a social gathering. And since this is the era of Zoom meetings, we're gonna try doing our social meeting via Zoom, which will be kind of interesting. But we had a really good meeting of the program committee last week, and we thought we would try the following. We're gonna set up just some general chat time, and then we're gonna set up some chat rooms where people can get into smaller groups and talk about items of compelling interest that are not healthcare technology related. And of course, we all know that the most important thing to be talking about is the upcoming baseball season. But for those of you who are not baseball fans, there might be a few other topics that will be of interest. And some of the ones we thought about were educating our kids in this crazy era, other things about coronavirus related topics, and possibly other things. So we'll set up the details and let you know about that. We've got a couple of interesting topics coming up in the next couple of months as well. Since this is an election year, healthcare policy is always on the radar. And we thought it would be interesting in September to do an update on healthcare information technology and a healthcare policy forecast in view of the election. And you can kind of think about how that might go. If Trump wins, if Biden wins, if the Senate goes Democratic, if the Senate stays Republican, yada, yada, yada. Some predictions on what might happen if that eventuality were to transpire. In addition, we are looking at an October meeting on the public health response to the coronavirus and what sorts of implications that may have for the technology world. So we're going to be really interested in both of those. The final thing I want to let you know is that the Northern Virginia Chamber of Commerce just sent me a note yesterday that they are doing a session on telemedicine, and I wanted to get that information out in front of everybody, and we will post a notice about that upcoming meeting for anybody that might be interested. Could be very very timely. As you all know, we did a meeting on telemedicine a few months ago. This will have a little bit different focus, so we think that will be an interesting topic. So with those general announcements, I want to turn it over to Linda and Deanne with thanks to the two of them for arranging this panel, which I think is going to be really interesting, and we'll launch into that. We expect to be closing the more formal part of this presentation by about 1:30, and we are going to then take the last half hour to go into general discussion, introductions, general information, that sort of thing. So the Zoom call will be open until 2, and we invite you to stay, introduce yourselves, and try to find the best. We're still struggling to find the best way to reintroduce the informal networking, introductions, and interaction in a Zoom environment. And we thought we'd try putting the introductions at the latter part of the meeting rather than at the front, so that people that have to go can do so. So with that, let me turn it over to Deanne and Linda with thanks for all the work you've done setting this up.
Oh, you're welcome.
Hi, all. Just to give you a understanding of where we came to be today, we originally thought of this meeting for April, but then of course the pandemic hit and things changed. And so we've moved it to July just to see whether or not the investment in the healthcare space was going to change, which obviously everyone has said it has done something to their strategy. And so I'm looking forward to hearing from everyone as well as you. Our own Deanne Kasim, who's the Executive Director of Health Policy for Change Healthcare, is our moderator. And she's going to introduce the participants. Different from most meetings, there won't be formal presentations today, but lots of Q&A. And when Deanne finishes with hers, her questions, I'm sure she's going to turn to our audience to hear what they have to say. So Deanne, it's all yours.
Linda, thank you. And thanks to all the panelists for being here today. I know we have a lot of things to cover. So what I wanted to do is to ask each speaker, I'm going to go through your names alphabetical by last name, to tell us about yourself, your position, and include a description of your group. Basically, what is your group investing in? So I'll start with Sally.
Hi, thanks Deanne, and thanks everyone for the invitation to join you today. We're pretty excited about the conversation. My name is Sally Elaine. I'm the regional head of J Labs in Washington, D.C. I'm part of Johnson & Johnson Innovation. We are a no strings attached incubator. This will be the 13th site that will be here in Washington, D.C., which will be opening early next year. We work closely in Johnson & Johnson Innovation to landscape and identify entrepreneurs and startups and companies that are on strategy for Johnson & Johnson for both investment and partnering.
Great, thank you. Elizabeth? Elizabeth, you're on mute.
Hello, sorry about that. Thank you all for having me. I'm really happy to be here. I am a co-founder of a healthcare angel group called MEDA Angels, M-E-D-A. We are a physician and scientist founded group, so not finance, okay? But we know how to do some math. But we invest in mid-C to Series A healthcare opportunities, all kinds, even wellness. The only thing that we don't invest in is therapeutics, first in human, but we will do repurposed drugs. So that's us.
Great, thank you. Claire?
Hi, everyone. Nice to meet you all, and thank you very much for the invitation. My name is Claire Boydo Johnson. I run a fund called the Maryland Momentum Fund. It's a $10 million fund that was created at the University System of Maryland. We are technology agnostic, but because we're in Maryland, we often R&D, and a huge percentage of our portfolio is therapeutics, med tech, and digital healthcare apps, and all sorts of life sciences. We typically invest in early stage startups that have less than a $10 million valuation, that are pre-Series A, and we typically invest somewhere between $250,000 and $500,000 in those companies. We require a co-investor, so if we're putting in $250,000, we require somebody else put in $250,000, because part of the purpose of our fund is not only to make money and have an evergreen fund so that we can reinvest in more early stage startups, but also so that we can catalyze investment in the Maryland economy and grow the entrepreneurial community. Thanks for having me.
Great, thanks, Claire. Capilla?
Hi, everyone. Thanks for inviting me. I'm based just outside of Philadelphia in Pennsylvania. So, and we'll invest across up and down the Eastern Seaboard. New Spring Capital has 4 different investment strategies. I'm with the healthcare fund. Obviously, because this is a health tech forum. The way we look at the world is, healthcare tends to be very complicated. So we've picked the lanes that we think we're good at investing in, and those are technology-enabled services, and those could be services to payers, providers, and pharma. In the case of pharma, obviously technology does not necessarily have to be software. It could even be biotechnology. We will invest directly in clinical providers, and between those 2 lanes, that will be the bulk of our investments. We will do a small percent of our investments, and we'll be a little opportunistic in specialty pharmaceuticals. And since everybody has their own definition of specialty pharmaceuticals, I'm careful to say so do we. We will not invest in companies taking clinical risks. So that's not our style. So we typically will invest in companies that are doing buy and build strategies with already approved drugs, or repurposing branded to generic drugs. We'll do that as well. What we look for, we're a growth stage investor. So we typically invest in companies, I'd say, on average, the last several deals that we've done, the company has been between 15 to 25 million of revenue. We'll go as low as 10. Going below 10 is tough for us. We have to see some sort of nexus to jumpstart that company to get it to 10 million, either through our network or the company's network. But other than that, I think we'll go as high as 75 to 100 million of revenue. From the profitability perspective, we tend to be a little open to that. We will invest in companies that are not profitable, but the expectation and understanding is that with our round, the company gets to profitability. So I'm investing in a little later stage than the other people on the panel. So I'm looking forward to an interesting discussion.
Great, thank you. Daniel.
Thanks, Dan Zahorsky, and good afternoon, everybody. I am a Director of Corporate Development within HealthWorks, within CareFirst, Blue Cross Blue Shield. And HealthWorks is the corporate development, corporate investment, and innovation arm of CareFirst. And my specific function and coverage area is corporate development. So it's more later stage, working with later stage companies on strategic partnerships and acquisitions. However, a vertical within HealthWorks and one of our core functions is venture capital. So we are looking to deploy funds strategically in the healthcare landscape, kind of broadly healthcare technology and services businesses. So we're making direct investments in those businesses. We have about 70 million of capital allocated for direct investments, and our sweet spot is Series A and Series B, and typically check size ranging from about 1 to 5 million. And we're not typically going to be a lead investor, but looking to typically as a follow-on investor. And and we also are making we have of capital allocated for direct investing in healthcare funds as well. So we're looking at other healthcare funds in the industry, and looking to leverage those investments to bring innovation into Care First, bring networks and relationships into Care First, and also to bring a pipeline of opportunity for the direct investment side of the house. So very excited to be on the panel with this group today, and appreciate the opportunity.
Great, thank you, everyone. This year is, I think it's fair to say, it's none like no other. The pandemic has changed so much. However, I know that deals are still getting done. So I wanted to start off, and we can go in alphabetical order again, to discuss what's changed in your world and why has it changed? How has this affected the scope, the number of, the size, the types of investments you're doing, and why do you think that is? So Sally, I'll start with you on that question.
Yeah, thank you. So we are, so as far as our incubator site and Johnson & Johnson Innovation here in Washington, D.C., we're moving and on track to open as we had planned. We're certainly sourcing, working across the landscape to identify entrepreneurs and companies that are on strategy for Johnson & Johnson. And as I partner with our capital investment group, JJDC, we have not slowed down in making those strategic investments. And we're looking, I think, to do potentially more in the next year as we move forward. We have done some different types of partnerships in response to COVID, and this is unrelated to what's well known in the public space for our vaccine work, but certainly looking at technologies, diagnostics, where we may have not worked with startups and companies or done partnerships with, we have made a shift in considerations of that science and technology.
Great, thank you. Elizabeth, what are you seeing?
We as an angel group, we too haven't really slowed down, but we, in our macro view, remains the same. We tend to look more into the future of the way medicine will be done. We hear about smart cities. We know there are going to be smart hospitals. So things that help with flow, things that help with continual monitoring through AI help so that providers can spend more time bedside and focus, more critical thinking. What do we do with all that EMR data, analytics? That's the future, well, yeah, now and the future. So that hasn't changed. What has changed is dissecting, drilling down the stage of the company. Something that just got FDA approval, let's say a device, now they have to sell, right? But the hospitals are not letting vendors in. So there's a delay. So we wonder, yes, it's wonderfully de-risked, but what's our tolerance level now for waiting for those sales and the burn rate involved? That is shifting a little. Or things that are dependent on clinical trials, right? You can't recruit unless it's COVID patients in hospitals. So that is also a calculus. So on that micro level, we are adjusting a little. But the overall thesis and our sweet spots haven't changed, if that makes sense. Take, for instance, we're just about to close on a minimally invasive device for women. It's a reproductive kind of aid. Elective surgeries are back, but now they're approved and whatnot, but it happens that they have a CE mark, so they can sell in Europe. So we're going to go ahead. And their FDA approval, they have value add committee approvals in hospitals in New York. New York's doing okay now, so they're back. So we calculated, despite the inability for vendors to go into hospitals, they have strategically mapped so they can carry on. I hope that's a decent example.
No, I think that's great. And Actually, that's something that we have done at Change Healthcare, is looking at reopening rates and who's doing what and where are now things spiking where they might shut down again, simply because that impacts our revenue side of our business. So I think everyone's looking at that pretty seriously.
Yeah.
Claire?
Yeah, thanks. That's a great question. I think what we're seeing a couple different trends that are not dissimilar from what Elizabeth shared. We're seeing more digital healthcare apps. We've certainly not seen a slowing. If anything, we're seeing a speeding up of what's going on. We fund early stage startups who all need money right now. And so I know that we're seeing other VCs who are saying, well, we're going to hold off and we're going to wait a little while, but not very many. And so, you know, as a university system, we continue to make investments. We've done about an investment a month since I've been here, and I joined about a year ago. We're seeing more people who are trying to make connections and links to solutions for COVID that are sometimes tenuous and sometimes real. But we're certainly seeing more digital healthcare apps than we've ever seen before. One thing that is slowing down the work, of course, is the fact that clinical trials have been slowed down. And so, you know, sometimes depending on how important those clinical trials are to getting to the next step, we're seeing a little slowing of how quickly these early stage companies are able to get to work. But in general, we have not seen fewer applications or fewer deals coming to us.
Great, thank you. Just a quick question to follow up on that. Are you seeing a lot of digital health apps for contact tracing or getting back to work?
Both, all, and then lots of other things. You know, there's a Chesapeake Digital Healthcare Alliance that Mark Comiskey is leading up that's started at Hopkins. And I think there's just a lot more interest in digital healthcare ops broadly. And I think it's frankly much easier to start a digital healthcare app than it is to start a life science company of most kinds. And so we're seeing more of them.
Makes sense. Thank you. Capilla?
I would say that our pace hasn't slowed down. We actually closed 2 deals after the lockdown happened. Our thesis hasn't changed. We're going to continue to invest in the same spaces. What has changed or what has tweaked is the diligence. And, you know, somebody said, so I think it was Elizabeth who pointed out, you know, we're really taking a very hard look at sales and marketing, sales cycles. You know, we're looking at P&L and saying, okay, this was your P&L in 2019 and you were projecting X in 2020. How has that changed? And what do you think happens in 2021? I understand that these are unusual times and people are struggling a little bit to project out pro forma revenues and other numbers, but we look at that, we've started thinking about, you know, how do we do diligence, on-site diligence, or do we feel safe going to visit a company if it's not within, you know, our geography? And as I did a deal in Texas, and I live in Pennsylvania, and now Texas is on the barred list in Pennsylvania because their numbers are spiking. So so we're looking at things like that to figure out how do we tweak diligence, what shape and form does diligence take, but our thesis per se has not changed because we were investing in themes that were needed last year, they're going to be needed this year, and they're going to be needed next year going forward as well. So, you know, yes, the pandemic has, you know, kind of taken on a life of its own in all our minds, but healthcare is healthcare, and healthcare will be needed. It was needed last year. It's going to be needed today. It's going to be needed tomorrow. So that nothing has changed from that perspective.
Great, thank you. Dan, what are you seeing?
Yeah, so being attached to Care First, I will say that you know, when the pandemic did hit, there was a slowdown and kind of a little bit of a reevaluation, just as we looked at the impact of Care First and, you know, our priorities and how it would impact the broader Care First. So we did slow down for a little bit. Part of that slowdown too is also looking to our existing portfolio and starting to have, more in-depth discussions with them about the impact of the pandemic on their business. I think some of the factors that the other panelists have brought up in terms of slowing sales cycle, strain on healthcare, hospital systems and provider groups. We really wanted to understand the impact of that on our, existing portfolio companies and be supportive of them and have those discussions, kind of just understand how the pandemic would impact them and how we could be helpful. So that was definitely the focus for the first 2 months into the pandemic. I think we've gotten comfortable that with the position of Care First and with moving forward with our investments and our thesis. And as other panelists have noted, I don't think we've really changed our approach to investments. And our themes, though, have been shaped by what we think are some lasting impacts of the pandemic. But some things that we see kind of shaping investment and shaping the future of healthcare a little bit are, kind of the shift to remote workforce, virtual health acceleration. I think the kind of forced adoption of telehealth and virtual health. It's probably going to change the way, or we believe it might change the way that that consumers and patients access healthcare going forward. So we're kind of factoring that into our thought process and our investment thesis. We believe, this year there's going to be more employer sensitivity to healthcare costs. We're facing some pretty significant premium increases next year, and employers across the country are obviously struggling. So there's going to be more sensitivity to those healthcare costs and insurance costs next year. And then other themes that we think are important are just the strain on providers in the healthcare system. I think there's going to be a little bit of a reshaping of healthcare delivery after we come through the pandemic. And another theme that we're factoring into our thought process is just the vulnerable populations are going to continue to grow. As we come through the pandemic, there's going to be expansion of likely Medicaid and uninsured populations. So we're looking at those themes, and we're thinking of the impact they'll have on the healthcare ecosystem, and we're definitely kind of factoring those into our investments going forward.
Yeah, I think you and I could compare notes because 40% of Change Healthcare's business actually comes from payers, and so we've been looking at the same factors, and that's actually a really good segue into our next question. So thank you for that, Dan. For all the panelists, when you look at here to the future, I'm sure your organizations, and it sounds like what you all just said, have had to pivot from, I know we started the year in January thinking, here's our goals, here's our metrics, here's what we're going to accomplish, and then now we've had to pivot. So when we look to the future, yes, we have states that are still not under control, they're spiking again. How do we make sense of this all? What are you using as your compass, if you will, to navigate? Are you looking at public health data, market data, government data? How are you perhaps tweaking your strategies for the rest of this calendar year and into next year? What are you trying to use? And I guess my question would be, what are you trying to use to put together some sort of a crystal ball, if you will? So I'll start with you, Sally.
Yeah, I'm actually interested to hear what some of our other panelists might have on this question. So yes, all of our, I think, strategic plans for 2020 have changed dramatically. We're rewriting what those strategic plans look like in an unknown world ahead of us. I think I was reading a McKinsey article recently that came out too. Our R&D leaders are spending their 40 to 50% of their time is really being spent right now on crisis management. And that's a big focus. What we've also been spending a lot of time on is our existing portfolio of companies that sit in RJ Labs portfolio. So how do we ensure that they can stay afloat? We've provided some relief for some of those companies We're also trying to get and support them in bridge funding opportunities, grant funding opportunities between big rounds of investments. So as we look too for bringing on new companies, I think, assessment of where they are and their fluidity in their pitch decks, I think we'll be looking at them a little differently as we move forward.
Great, thank you. Elizabeth?
Sure. So what sources are we looking at? Certainly, any number of secondary market reports, but our membership includes quite a number of physicians and healthcare execs at hospitals and so forth, or industry. We call them up. We have primary interviews. How's it going? Some of them are quite a number of surgeons for some reason in our group. Are you back on track? Is what's being heard in news really the case where you are? And that's been enormously helpful. We also look to see what other countries are doing. A lot of our portfolio companies will look to having, a US FDA as well as CE. And so we look to see, okay, if not here now, how about Europe? Things of that nature, or even Asia too, because the control is slightly better there. Also too, as Sally mentioned, the fluidity. A lot of them depend on healthcare systems, for instance, as their customers and their big contracts. They're hit the most. So what would have been a sure thing is not the sure thing. So we look to see where else they could get their customers from. Pharma may be one. So some fluidity, as long as the backbone makes sense and it's not terribly rigid. One thing that we have not been focused on are just COVID per se solutions. I think the way the therapeutics and vaccines are coming along, we'll have a solution, touch wood, but that's going to be, we don't invest in just COVID deals. I know there's been a proliferation of those, but things have to have an enduring value proposition. So we're diligencing harder, stretching the brain more, talking to colleagues, frontline, primary interviews, definitely.
Great, thank you so much. Claire?
Yeah, in terms of where is the question in terms of where are we sourcing our deals from, Deanne?
What are you using for your compass for the long term? What kind of data are you looking at? Government data, market data, economic data, that sort of thing?
Sure. I mean, we have a number of sort of super users in the Maryland market. We have a number of different VCs we talk to on a regular basis, and we are, sharing deals constantly. So I've, had conversations with several of Dan's colleagues at Care First HealthWorks recently, and I'm talking to Squadra and, lots of the VCs that are in the area. And then of course, going across the University System of Maryland, as I'm a part of the university system, we're doing a lot of work trying to figure out, what's working, who's getting SBIR funding, how well is, who's getting NIH grants, and how those are really important right now because that has not decreased. The SBIR stuff is still moving along. MIPS grants are still moving along. There's a lot of public money available. And frankly, I have been heartened to see so many early stage startups, which is where we focus, being really crafty. A lot of them have gotten PPP funding, and that means a lot to me. They've been very crafty and very thoughtful, and they've reduced their cash burn as they need to in order to get to where they need to get to. And so, a lot of it's luck and a lot of it's timing. One of our portfolio companies, Next Step Robotics, a Towson University and UMUC grad, is trying to find a solution for foot drop. He started his Series A fundraise in end of February, like crappy timing, right? And so now he's just doing a bridge round, but I trust in his technology and I believe in him, and he's gotten a lot of PPP money. He's gotten some local loan money. He's gotten a grant from Fulton Bank. He's doing everything he needs to do. He's cut his cash burn. This is the type of company we want to invest in.
It's great. It's heartening to hear that companies are being so crafty, or I would even add scrappy, because that's really what you have to do.
Yeah, and there's no negative connotation to crafty. I mean
Right,
that in a positive way. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think that's the way to go. I think all companies, quite honestly, have to be crafty and scrappy right now, regardless of size. Kapila?
So I'll agree with that. It doesn't matter what stage you're in, you're managing cash, and cash is king. So actually, when we first went into lockdown, and NewSpring invests, we have multiple strategies. So we have a strategy that invests in technology and business services. We have a sub-debt fund that's industry agnostic. So we actually set up at the umbrella level, we set up a couple of different task forces, I should say. So it's the task groups. One actually targeted the financial side of things, PPP money, Main Street money, what are the other sources that our portfolio companies can go through? And given that our mezz funds and SBIC, we have very good relationships with the SBA. So we were talking to them on a daily basis almost to say, okay, how's this going to go down? What are the requirements going to be? And we were passing that information on to our portfolio companies. The economic task force, it was kind of split. We had some proprietary information, some public domain information, and we were melding that together. We were gathering information from, portfolio companies from one sector that was very valuable to portfolio companies in other sectors. I mean, foot traffic, for example. There was one company that was tracking foot traffic in all their locations, and they were spread out across the country. So they knew down to, the mile level what was happening. And when they aggregated that data, it became very useful across the US. So we had, so we were melding public and private sources of information and sharing across all our portfolio companies. So it was a little bit of and we actually assigned, from our group, we assigned a couple of analysts to actually weekly track all this, pull all of it together, make sure that it was available on a very regular basis to all our portfolio companies. And so I wouldn't say there was just one source of information that we were relying on, but it was multiple different sources that we were aggregating together.
Yeah, I think that sounds about right. There's no one place right now. You're pulling and picking data from all sorts of sources. Just to add what my experience has been at Change Healthcare, my team does government affairs and policy. And because so many of the regulations and waivers are affecting our revenue projections, we're now working more than ever with investor affairs to pull that information and exchange information from them. And they're sending us information as to what the street is valuing us at because of these regulations. So there's definitely an intersection there.
And there was so many changes happening constantly, especially in and around the PPP money, because that went into effect so fast that the SBA in itself, they didn't know what they needed to do and what they needed to require. And it was changing on a day-to-day basis. So we kept a pretty tight grip on all of that, because we didn't want any of our companies to be out of compliance just because they were in compliance when they took the money down, and all of a sudden a week later they're out of compliance. We didn't want issues like that. So we tracked it very tightly.
Yeah, that's right.
Yep.
Dan?
Yeah, just to second that point, we have been talking to, one source of information for us has been outside attorneys through networks, and especially helping us navigate some PPP questions for some of our portfolio companies that might be on the cusp of whether they qualified or not. Other sources of information that we've leveraged throughout the last 6 months have been definitely on the venture side, have been other PE funds, as Claire, or other VC funds, as Claire mentioned, and our portfolio companies too. I think the discussions with them have been very informative of what companies are facing in the market today as they try and sell their offering to either payers or to health systems. So on the venture level, those have been some great sources for us. And then we've also played a role in helping shape and inform the Care First, the broader strategy and how we should think about the pandemic. And for those discussions, relationships with consultants and relationships with investment bankers and relationships, fortunately we're part of the Blue Cross Blue Shield plan, so we can have pretty open conversations with other Blue plans nationwide. So those discussions and those relationships have been very helpful in shaping our direction and shaping our strategy in light of the pandemic. And then I just say finally, as a payer ourselves, we've definitely been looking at our own data as well as our discussions with employer groups and discussions with health systems to further shape and kind of help us think through our strategy.
Great, thanks for that. I'll ask all the panelists, and you can just raise your hand if you want to answer this. But when you're looking at prospective companies, what would be your best couple lines of advice that you would tell a company that's trying to go for funding and is fairly new to that process right now? I mean, yes, this is an incredibly difficult time for everything, but particularly be looking for funding. What would be like your pearl of wisdom, or pearls, if you have a couple, that you would offer this company?
I'm happy to start because I know that the earlier stage investors will also have a viewpoint, but I think I'll make one comment that will apply to everyone. Build your relationships long before you actually need the money. Start talking to people and say the best time to talk to investors are when you are not actually raising money. Just get to know them, tell them about what you're trying to do, so that they can start to track you. And quite honestly, for me, if I've been tracking a company for a year, and at the beginning of the year, they said they were going to do X, Y, Z, and at the end of 12 months, they come back and said, look, I did X, Y, Z. To me, that's a huge win. And it's like, okay, this management team knows what they're doing, right? And so or if you haven't met X, Y, Z, Y, and have a very good answer for that. But building relationships long before you actually need money is probably, I think it's a universal theme.
Good point. Elizabeth, I think you're going to say something. You're on mute, Elizabeth.
Sorry about that. So what I would tell them now, more than ever, but always the case, look more and more to adjacent markets. So many of us, the companies that we invest in healthcare-wise, it's always the provider or the payer, sometimes consumer, but mostly it's one or the other. But look to adjacent markets more so than ever now. As I mentioned, pharma or CROs, rather, they're very much in business because of the demand, right? Patient engagement, for instance, platforms, get them to comply with their medication, whatever. Use that instead for clinical trials. Make sure that they are engaged so they don't drop out. So we're asking them to really think of other client segments. That's always the case, but even more so, I think they have to now.
Yeah.
I could add to that. I would say be persistent. I think and fundraising right now is going to take a little bit longer than it has in the past. I think decision-making processes are a little bit more drawn out. So that'd be some advice. Also anticipate how the pandemic is going to impact your business and your value proposition and your forecast and kind of what your pitch, and make sure you're prepared to adequately address those concerns and questions as you look to go into those discussions. And finally, I'd say Yeah, I think that's it. Lost my train of thought there.
That's all right. It'll come back to you.
So, start a telehealth platform. That's a good way to raise money right now.
For sure. And I've actually on that note, one of the questions I had, and I would invite everyone in the audience, if you have questions, send them in the chat, or we're going to open it up to Q&A shortly. But my last question for all of you would be on, the policy front. Obviously, telehealth, we know that there's regulations that will be changing. CMS and Seema Verma, who runs it, has said, the genie's out of the bottle, to use her quote, on relaxing some of these regulations on telehealth. And that's a bipartisan issue. But what is really interesting, and this is sort of a segue or a preview, if you will, of our September discussion, will be, this is a big election year, and the stakes are pretty high, not just on the federal level, but definitely in the states level. But let's just focus for this conversation on, change in the White House, change in Congress, in terms of perhaps the Senate is in play. Curious as to whether your organizations are starting to model any of this vis-a-vis your strategies, your investing strategies. And Dan, this may impact payers a little bit more because with the Biden administration, we're looking at, perhaps some different policies to build on the ACA, but I didn't know if anyone had some comments on that. It's okay, you don't have to. But anyway, if there's people in the audience, either send in a chat or raise your hand so I can see you.
I think there's no I think it's bipartisan, I hope, that all these remote monitoring and telehealth type of visits is going to be part of our strategy, and both sides, regardless, will go for it. One from the money, one from the patient side. That is for sure. And I think it's a wise investment. Well, there'll be still some visits. We'll go back to in-person visits, but that genie's out of the bottle. And so I think we are seeing more investments in telehealth, definitely.
Yeah, and I can just add on that. I mean, we're certainly seeing startups and entrepreneurs with technology or platform technologies to deliver in the telemedicine space. And I think they're getting more traction than they would have 6 months to a year ago. So because I think there's a recognition in the marketplace that the leaps and bounds we've made in the past few months, some of that's going to continue, and we're not going to go fully backwards. So I think there's a huge opportunities for startups and entrepreneurs that are developing technologies that can be included in that telemedicine space.
Especially if Congress also makes more permanent the reimbursements around that, definitely.
Yeah, and I think it's another good thing to look at is what government entities have already been doing. So I think a great example is the VA and how they've partnered with Walmart across the country, and how Philips has now put in place, is starting to put in place in most Walmarts, units in which veterans can get access. And this was happening before COVID. And that expansion is massive, and a huge opportunity to serve the VA where there was an underserved population before.
You mean at their urgent cares or something? Walmart Associates? What do you mean?
They're putting in units in which veterans can walk into a Walmart and sit at a computer screen and access immediate care. And you, which we saw in COVID, right, where state borders were relaxed for patient care, that has been mechanized for VA care, where clinic access was 100 miles for many veterans.
It's nice.
So I do think that there are a couple of things, right? And I think everyone's agreed to this. I don't mean to pick on Dan by any means, but the payers need to wake up to the fact that this telemedicine genie is out of the bottle, right? And a lot of payers, depending on what their requirements are saying we're not going to pay as much for a televisit as for an in-person visit. But if you're requiring a doctor to provide that visit, then the cost of the care hasn't changed. So now it becomes a cost differential as to how you're providing care, what you're getting reimbursed, and whether that makes sense, and who's taking the risk at that point. So there's a cascade of events. I'm not sure that anyone, be it the provider side or the payer side, has actually thought through that cascade of events. But I do agree with Sally in that we're seeing a lot of alternate models now being provided to specific populations. And if we can sort of figure out whether those specific populations, the way the care is being provided and the cost of care and the reimbursement, whether that translates from one segment of the population to another segment of the population, those are things that are going to be interesting trends to watch for.
Simon, do you want to pose your question or your point?
Yeah, I noticed yesterday there was a bipartisan bill introduced in Congress that is seeking to retain the modifications to the regulations around reimbursement of telehealth post the emergency. And that, of course, goes directly to this conversation, because if we end the emergency as the rules are currently written, we go straight back to where we were before, which doesn't help anybody, I don't think.
I think there's a strong push. Oh, sorry, Doug.
Yeah, hi, this is Doug Goldstein. I was on a webinar with Horizon's Chief Clinical Innovation Officer, and she said in 3 months, their telehealth claims went from 12,000 to 70,000. With in a 3-to-1 ratio, they were running with behavioral health, anxiety disorder, those kinds of conditions in that increase. It was pretty insightful.
Yeah, I think another addition to that discussion is it's really going to be interesting to see how healthcare systems and hospital systems end up working going forward. So a lot of the digital healthcare apps that I've seen recently, they were in, pilot programs with a certain set of healthcare systems, and almost every pilot program has been put on hold during COVID. And so one of the things that, a lot of our startups have said is, oh, we're in a pilot program with XYZ hospital system, but that pilot system's been put on hold, and understandably so. There's a lot of other things going on. But I think for the digital healthcare app specifically, I mean, they have to be connected to Epic. They have to be connected to Cerner. And I think those two entities have an extraordinary amount of power, right? They're kind of monopolies for sure. And if you can't connect with them, you're out right away. So I'm definitely seeing that trend.
A number of health systems rapidly expanded. I know White Plains Hospital, they basically had a 4-week sprint, and they enabled telemedicine and televisits across. So many health systems, large and small, just did a sprint to get virtual visits in place for as many of their populations. And it even happened with me and Inova. So
yeah.
And just to build on that too, I've heard not just the larger health systems, but smaller independent providers have quickly had to respond and adopt to the virtual and telehealth. And I think on the regulatory side, I do think there will be legislation put forward that will retain some of the reimbursement elements that are in place today with the pandemic. I also think there will be a shift just in consumer and patient behavior. I think there's adoption of virtual visits and telehealth, where people had previously, been opposed to trying it before. I think the response in what I've been hearing and reading is that the people have used virtual and telehealth, and it's been a positive experience. So I think not only will legislation and reimbursement continue to point towards virtual and digital health, but I think patient and consumer behavior will also lean in that direction.
Yeah, this is Maruf. I'm from Inova, so a little bit local. Before COVID, we were actually thinking about telehealth just being part of healthcare anyway, and trying to think of models of how to do that from how much would a patient be willing to pay for a virtual visit, knowing that we didn't qualify pre-COVID sort of from a legal perspective. Once COVID hit, we were similar to what Doug said. We had a quick sprint to where probably 75% of our ambulatory visits were video. And we patched things together really quickly and went that way. And now what we're looking for is precisely what you guys have said. What care models can we employ where video visits are always part of the equation? For example, a wound check might always be a video visit. That's just how we do it, and push patients towards that. I think remote monitoring is another piece that we're really into it. And really just the philosophy of how to promote seamlessness into to the point of Epic and Cerner being monopolies. That's something I think we struggle with, just from a value perspective. If we can perform a function in that, multi-million-dollar software that we invested in, we're going to do it unless there's a clinical need. And so it's oftentimes when we see a product that we like, we have to do that value proposition.
If I can add, I'm the patient representative for an ACO, CTO here in Maryland. And when all of this hit, a lot of the practices, and they tend to be small and more independent practice groups, didn't have a lot of this. And the ACO invested in the software and made it very rapidly available to all the practices. And I know they've picked that up quite a bit. So I think we're dealing with not just large organizations, but across the board, even smaller organizations that have been pretty quick to adopt it because, frankly, they needed to.
Yeah.
Got a question.
Richard, hold your question real quick. I need to do one housekeeping announcement. Kapila needs to run to another engagement, but I wanted to acknowledge the fact that she was so gracious with her time and insights, and thank you, Kapila, for participating. We appreciate it.
Thank you for inviting me. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Have a great weekend, everyone.
You too. Okay, Richard, thanks.
Hi, this is Richard Singerman. So we know that during the COVID, a lot of people were putting off their chronic care or maybe visits that weren't chronic care but weren't life-threatening, but over the long term could be very damaging. Are you seeing some trends where people are just on a longer term going to keep putting off that care? Or maybe there's going to be more technologies that people have in the home that they can hook up to their phone that's going to replace some of those hospital visits. Are you starting to see that?
I can chime in there. One of my partners is a physician at Hopkins. It's really sad, but the chronic care patients, some of them, they're so afraid to come that unfortunately they're dropping dead. It's really awful. It's pretty awful in some of those cases that are not amenable to televisits. They're afraid to come. So unfortunately, that's the way it's going. So I don't know, they're going to have to come up with another model like your remote monitoring or what have you, if they're commercial, that is. So it's, we need a way to help them short of coming in for an elective surgery or what have you. That's another tier, but there's been some tragedy along the way.
Can you speak to more specifically, like what chronic conditions or for instance, are really sticking out, or certain cancers or whatever?
So I can't speak about everything, but he is a interventional radiologist and his specialty is stroke. So if someone is having some symptoms or whatever, they'll just not go. They'll not come to the hospital and just say, I'm going to wait it out. And unfortunately, he said they're dying. So that's one example. I don't know about the others. I can't speak to the others.
Hi, this is Zirkan Hassan. Richard, there actually was some data recently published that Cigna Healthcare in April looked at hospitalization reductions for non-elective conditions. Acute coronary syndromes had an 11% reduction, and it went all the way up to AFib. TIAs and AFibs, which had a 30 to 35% reduction. And I can send you some data on that if you like. The other area that I think, I mean, this has been a great conversation. Deanne, thank you for pulling all this together and the questions. You know, I've been listening in terms of telehealth, and especially in the COVID environment. And you know, I just want to point out that I think there's a difference between telehealth and telemedicine. And I think that when the pandemic hit, everyone was focusing on how do we get visits back up? How do we get revenue back up? And what I submit is, I think that's potentially the wrong way, especially in a long-term solution, to look at this going forward, in that we have to look at clinical metrics, we have to look at workflows, really to make the whole telemedicine condition hold in going forward. It can't just be what platform are we going to use. And it really is going to depend on what the regulatory changes are going to come out of the government, specifically in my mind in two areas. Number one is in terms of the revenue. Is it going to be same as in-person reimbursement? I think it's not, but my crystal ball's no better than, well, your guys' crystal ball's probably better than mine. But, and secondly is the whole physician credentialing across state lines. I think that's going to be a huge factor in and how we go forward with this. If they put that back in place, or if they modify to just regional geography, I think that's going to impact all this. And I'll stop.
Couple things, because we do have some questions lined up, but Erkan, I wanted to just tell you real quick. The physicians practicing over state lines is actually a state issue. Congress tried to put some legislation in one of the rescue packages, and they were told that would be unconstitutional to do that against state rights. So it's going to be an interesting call in the next legislative sessions for the state. Barry Lipsy sent in a question. One question for the panelists. What are some of the biggest errors, mistakes that you have seen startups make, especially now? COVID has uncovered or just made more evident the more usual problems of startups. So if anyone wants to jump in on that, please do.
I'll mention a couple of things. I think it's underestimating the time it will take and the money that you'll need. So, and I think thinking that through even more so right now, you know, companies that we ask when they put in their applications for our JLab sites, we're certainly asking them to provide, and I think this really helps their pitch decks, project plans around your next 12 to 24 months of runway. So what are you trying to accomplish with the funding you have, or with the funding that you're trying to raise? And I think that's where we can also come in and help them, where we think they're maybe underestimating or some of their research timelines.
I think for us, there hasn't been, their pitch decks remain as aggressive timeline wise. Oh, we'll get the clinical trial done, no problem. And we'll get the manufacturing done because we'll get the funding in place, just as you said, Sally. There is no accounting for COVID. And, you know, of course there must be. And the ones that I really appreciate are those with a little asterisk saying it may be extended by a little bit something, like, thank you, you know. So the aggressiveness, I understand why they do that. But those that build in that sensitivity into their pitch decks get my vote. So I would tell them, don't be shy about the reality and be frank. We know the situation. So that's what I would tell some of the startups. The mistake that they're making.
Great, thank you for that. One other question. Healthcare is notoriously slow to innovate. What do you think the current crisis may impact changing that? So I should say, what do you think the changes might be from the current crisis vis-a-vis innovation in healthcare?
I think this is Claire. I mean, I think there's a whole lot of people who are spending a lot more time on healthcare. I mean, we're all healthcare dorks, right? They love healthcare, and everyone in the world is looking at healthcare in a new way. So I think there's a lot more emphasis on healthcare. Healthcare is on the front page of every newspaper in the world now, and everyone's reading about it. And so I think you're going to find more people who enter the healthcare career, you know, the healthcare industry as a career. I think you're going to find more people that do their part to try to do good with it. And I think there will continue to be more and more funding for it on a federal, state, and local level.
I think the disruption that the pandemic has brought will force more innovation into healthcare. Frankly, there's going to be, you know, healthcare and healthcare delivery has been kind of upended through the pandemic. So there's unfortunately going to be a forcing mechanism of you know, providers, health systems, payers. There's going to have to be a change in the way that they do business, or they're not going to potentially make it through the disruption. So I think it is going to be a little bit of a forcing factor for the acceleration of innovation within healthcare.
And it's certainly brought to light the need for more public-private partnerships for healthcare and innovation. We've seen that with the very large agreements that have been put in place with BARDA and Big Pharma and manufacturing sites here in the United States. Uniquely, outside of our vaccine work at Johnson & Johnson, JLabs put an agreement in place last year pre-COVID with BARDA under Rick Bright's leadership. And this partnership was solely to identify and work with startups and entrepreneurs and bring them into our incubator system to fill the gaps in some of BARDA's needs for innovation and technology to respond to just what we're responding to right now. So, you know, we were really excited to highlight that last year. And I think what we're seeing is that we need to do more public-private partnerships to fund and drive science and technology innovation.
Yeah, I would agree with that, Sally. And I certainly hope that is the case, because I don't think either sector can solve the current challenges we already had, plus the challenges from the pandemic by themselves. That we need to have more partnerships. If anyone else has questions for the speakers, I would encourage you to either raise your hand or send in a chat. One question I have for the speakers is both the current administration as well as candidate and Vice President Biden, or I should say presumed candidate until the convention next month, have said they want to shift the healthcare supply chain to the United States, get out of China, get out of other countries. What are your thoughts on that? And would that affect your business at all, your investment models?
I think that's a platitude. I don't think it's realistic at all. I think that's just a political, you know, we're trying to create jobs however we can. I'm not a logistics manager. So much of what we do is dependent on outside of the United States. I don't see that changing anytime soon.
I don't think it's I don't think it will change very quickly. Agree with you, Claire. However, we do need supply chain, as I'm involved with therapeutics and so forth, even devices. We need some level of independence, and I think they're trying to develop more manufacturing, biologics, CROs here. We need to control the vaccine or biologic supplies more here. We need some level of independence, but I don't know how much of a huge shift and how quickly. You know, it's money, right? However, it's a national security issue. It's complex. It's complex.
Well, national security includes decentralizing the grid, decentralizing the agriculture, and renewable energy. So it's moving from a consumer society to a sustainer society. And that's a multi-decade effort, but it's the right direction.
In that, biologics are a part of our national security, stockpiling and so forth. That's what I'm referring to. Got to start somewhere, right? Take care of your people.
I have another question for the panelists. What would the panelists like to see pitched that you're not seeing?
So tough.
How about silver bullets?
I just to build off the last question, yeah, innovative supply chain solutions might be interesting given in light of pandemic. I would also say solutions and services focused on isolation and senior services. I think there's opportunity in those areas, and I think those are somewhat neglected areas.
I agree, and I would add mental health care in all sorts of different ways, because I don't think anybody really understands all of the results of what's happening from people being socially isolated.
Ironically, that's what we have been seeing a lot of. Maybe we should exchange deals.
We should, yeah. I mean, there's a lot there. There's a lot of competition, but there's a lot more that needs to be done. It seems to have been an underfunded sector for a long time. And the sector is quite broad, because you've got everything from private practitioners who don't take insurance at all, and they've been relatively reticent to think through different apps, and and then on the other side, there's university systems or municipalities that where a clinician sees 1,200 people a month. I may be exaggerating a bit, but a lot, right? And those two different types of clinicians need different things. People in rural areas that don't have access to things, I mean, COVID and the way that we live today in our society is so very different. Apps for rural people, we've got family in Carroll County, Iowa. They can't get to the hospital like they used to. And there's got to be some solutions, creative solutions, not just in the mental health care space, but, people who have not been able to get access and can't just bring their kid to Kennedy Krieger now like they used to be able to. There's got to be some new innovation there.
On the mental health side, we're seeing a lot that are more private-based, not hospital-based providers who are trained, and it's not always, the MDs. It can be people who are certified, and that's wonderful. And B2B to C kind of plays that are evidence-based and so forth. We're seeing quite a lot of that. I think COVID has made it less stigmatized too, so that's good.
Yep.
Maybe employer assisted programs to support that and fund that, subsidize that, and even there's even a VC out west that focuses on mental health for just children, the teens. So it's funny, we've seen quite a bit of that. Clear. I'll send them.
Great. Sounds great.
You're talking about Phase Initiative, right? Phase Sahi's. Elizabeth, you're talking about Phase Initiative?
Phase, right. I love that, taking care of our kiddos. Yes, they're vulnerable.
I think Kevin, I just told Kevin as a comment. Kevin, did you want to jump in?
Well, I can. I was actually, they sort of covered it, but I was just going to, talk a little bit about, the way, I work in marketing and biz dev and cybersecurity, and one of the projects I'm working on is about reinventing that process, because I don't think the pandemic is going away for the next year. And because of that, raising funds and things are hard. So, I wanted to hear about things you wanted to see, because one of the things I've been working on is something we call Project X, which is kind of like a demo day, launch day kind of brochure for the venture capitalists and whatnot on this call. They know what that is. But for others, it's kind of a brochure done about the companies in a cohort or in a portfolio that say what the solutions are. And we're kind of trying to do that with a bringing the trade show to you kind of approach. And healthcare is actually our second our second sector that we're going after. Currently, we're doing energy and whatnot, just bringing, you know, and it's totally just kind of being a thought leader and bringing like, hey, here's some cool companies that are out there that you might not have heard of that you might want to take a look at. So anyway, but the question about where should people go, silver bullets I'll be working on, you know, but that is the answer I was there, the question I was sort of looking for as well. But I will say, if any of you have anybody in your portfolio or you know anybody that solves something cool in healthcare that you think other companies should know about, possibly in the cybersecurity world, love to hear from you and whatnot.
Great. Any other questions from the audience? Either jump in, send a chat. Okay. I think we covered the waterfront.
I did, when Maruf shared earlier the comment I was going to make, but I was on mute. I had this conversation with the senior executive of a major health system. Health systems need to figure out their Amazon Prime. What is available to me for $1 a month or $5 a month? Or how do I become a member? And that's where health plans have had an advantage. They've viewed their people as members, and health systems have viewed them as patients, and they have the disease. It's a reaction to take care of them. So moving from seeing people as patients and consumers to members is a huge leap in the thinking. And most health systems don't have true customer relationship management systems.
So I would just add, my wife and I are encountering the reality of that since we moved a little over a year ago, that the old health system that we used to go to still sort of thinks of us as their patients, and the
Right.
new health system that we have interacted with a little bit sort of thinks of us as their patients. And if I joined all the patient portals that I've been invited to sign up for, I think I'd have 5 of them. And I mean, there is nobody in that constellation that I could look to looks at me as a member, except my insurance company. And with no insult to any insurance company, I kind of don't want to filter my health care through my insurance company. So I feel like we're juggling way more than we have to. Well, let me then kind of move into the next phase. First of all, I want to thank our panelists. I wish we could give you all a virtual round of applause or something, but this has been just incredible, and I've really enjoyed it. I know everybody has, and this level of the thing I miss from our in-person meetings is the interaction we typically get. And I would just say that I think we're all being a lot more polite in Zoom than we are in person, because it's harder to interrupt and it's harder to make side comments and that sort of thing. But it's really been interesting. Let's kind of move into a more open.
Hey, Jim.
I think Deanne's moderation's been excellent also.
I would agree. I would agree. So thank you,
Sorry, that was
Deanne.
just me trying to do my little bit for the applause. I found.
Okay, okay. And as usual, Dr. Nick was able to bring us down to a teenage level.
To a base level, are you saying?
To sort of get going. But let me suggest that we kind of move into introductions and general comments. I'll invite Nick to kind of moderate that, and I'll invite everybody to kind of introduce themselves, and a brief comment or so would be welcome, but let me emphasize the brief, because there are over 30 of us. So over to you, Nick. So
remember, folks, I control the horizontal, I control the vertical. So pay attention to what Jim said. Here's the best way of doing this. If you would be kind enough to raise your hand, hopefully you all know how to do this at this point. We're now, I want to say 4 or 5 into these things. And then I will take people as they show up, and I'll ask you not to raise your hand twice so that you get 2 slots. Nobody be smart, Alec, like that. Simon was first. If you'd like to introduce yourself, and then I'll work through and I'll mention you and you talk. Please remember to unmute yourself. Simon.
Yes. Simon Fittle, CEO Galileo Analytics here in DC. working on a number of really interesting things. One is bringing open data sources into an accessible format globally. We're setting up at the moment a global cancer registry, for example, and also working with the Illinois state government on the data initiative in telehealth.
Thank you, Simon. Kevin McGrail.
Well, you guys already heard from me a little bit, but I am the, I think, resident cybersecurity person. Love doing anything involving cyber. I also do a ton with open source software. In fact, my dumpster fire of the week has been dealing with all the 4chan-esque racist comments that have been coming on the Spam Assassin mailing list, because we have been working for a few months now to remove, in fact years, but very heavily in the last few months, to remove racially charged language from Spam Assassin, like blacklist and whitelist. Suffice it to say, that has become a very large political debate that I really don't care about. But other than that, thanks all. And you know, if you guys need any help with cybersecurity, that's what I do.
And I'm going to say, look, if we have some time at the end, I've got two questions. One, let's talk about the Twitter hack, because that was deep and involved. And also the fact that the Iranian hacking videos were published online, all 40 megabytes of how to hack, and showing the actual activity, which I thought was interesting. Jennifer Moore.
Sorry, had to unmute myself. Good afternoon. I'm a healthcare IT consultant. I've worked many years with Tim Oakes and have been a longtime member of the DC HealthTechNet group.
Thank you. I see you, Ray. I'll get to you. I'm just going to go through Eric Hassan first.
Erkan, that's okay. Hi, I'm Erkan Hassan. I'm a PharmD by training, and I'm an independent consultant on telemedicine, clinical validation, and clinical innovators.
And I'm not going to show my ineptitude, and I'm hoping there's only one Ray on the call, and ask Ray to introduce himself and pronounce his last name.
Hi, Ray Scudlow. Good to see everyone virtually. I too missed the in-person meetings, which, God willing, will happen soon. I'm a former Executive Vice President and General Counsel at Children's National Medical Center. For the last several years, I've been representing healthcare technology startups, most significantly Be Well Connected Health, which can, to Jim's issue, can aggregate all these portals so you don't have death by portal. I also represent a number of companies in healthcare AI and a healthcare application to help dementia patients. So looking forward to talking to some of our panelists later on. Thank you.
Fantastic. Seth Rubenstein. Might be on mute. Or might have disappeared. No, he's still there. He's on mute. Seth, you're on mute. I don't think I can unmute. I've got to find you on this big long list.
I got it. Good afternoon, everyone.
There we go.
Happy to be here again. I'm a private practitioner podiatrist in Reston, Virginia. And this year I'm spending half my time practicing and half my time serving through my national trade association, the American Podiatric Medical Association, as president. So it's been an interesting year. Not as much travel as I expected, but nonetheless an interesting year.
I'm going to say maybe that was a good thing, but not for the travel industry, obviously. Nobody else has raised their hand, so Barry, that doesn't count if you do it there. And Anne, I see you. Okay, Barry, go.
Okay. Now how you want to do it. Yeah, Barry Lipsey. I do marketing and business management consulting in healthcare. I'm currently a mentor in the Maryland Venture Mentoring Service, working with young companies and startups. And I'm also consulting for 4 startups, 2 of which are in preventive care, prenatal, postnatal, perinatal, and physical therapy, a language translation service, and one, because it's got to be in the mix, a COVID tracking program. all apps for telemed.
Just to be clear,
Interesting times.
thanks, Barry. It's not that I don't want to do it this way. You have to see my screen to understand why it's very hard to see you in the mass of, I'm seeing everybody, so it's kind of difficult to spot you, that's why. But I did see Anne, and then I'll go to the couple that have raised their hands.
I have a quick question for Barry first. Barry,
Kevin,
is that a real
hold
room?
on and just let everybody introduce themselves first?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Anne.
Hi, this is Anne Rosenblum. I'll be quick because I want to hear the discussion at the end. I'm with Fairfax County Economic Development Authority. We're the marketing arm of Fairfax County, and I've been with HealthTechNet for 15 years, and I live in Reston. So hi from Reston.
Thank you very much. Richard.
Hi, Dr. Richard Singerman, TrustNet MD. We focus at patient and clinician engagement solutions.
Fantastic, thank you. Hui, I hope I get that right. And if I didn't, then he didn't get that I was Zukauskas. Hui, oh, who? You're on mute, by the way, in case you're talking at me saying, no, 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 that's not how you pronounce my name. We'll come back. Till Jolly.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Till Jolly. Know many of you, emergency physician, previously chief medical officer of a telemedicine company called SOC Telemed. Currently spending most of my time supporting health and human services, preparedness and response related to the COVID response, focused primarily on telemedicine, which has obvious applications to what we've been hearing.
Thank you. Linda.
Linda Siegel, executive search with the McCormick Group. I head up our life science and healthcare practice with some emphasis on healthcare technology, obviously.
Thank you. Lloyd.
Hi, Lloyd Brodsky. Depending on your point of view, I'm either retired or unemployed. Was a population health data scientist in data warehouses. And right now I'm volunteering to do some social determinant stuff with COVID data, and have discovered that the Hipaa safe harbor rule pretty much disembowels the ability to join it with census data. I may actually write a paper on that.
Thank you. Mandy.
Hey all, Mandy Peckham from Acumen Solutions. I've been in the federal consulting space for the last 15 years, and at Acumen I'm driving growth in the federal health space, HHS, DHA, VA, and this is my first time on one of these events, and I just really want to say thank you to the panelists and everybody that's been speaking. It's been a really awesome event. Thank you.
Welcome. Thank you for joining us. Doug Goldstein.
Doug Goldstein. I'm a fractional executive to a couple companies, including US Healthy Work with Dr. David Shulkin, helping businesses reopen safely, and Palo Alto Health Sciences, which has a at-home contactless 28-day non-drug therapy for PTSD and panic attack that have been proven very effective at Palo Alto VA and Highmark, where it dropped total medical costs 1/4. So thank you.
Thanks. I see no others, so I'll get to go last. Nick Vanta Hayden, Virtual Medical Director to companies trying to open safely, educational institutions trying to open safely, and now a permanent librarian reading more information than I ever read in my entire medical school career on a daily basis. Okay, so I did see somebody said we'd like to talk about the Twitter hack, and since we happen to have an expert on here, if you're not, and I know actually that's also true. I said you could you had a question. I'm sorry. We were going to do that, Kevin. If I'm looking for you, I can't see you. I'm sorry.
I'm right here. It's all good.
Oh, you are. As I say, I keep losing people. You keep moving around. Stop moving.
I'll try not to. No, they're happy to talk about anything involving cyber pretty much ad nauseum. But I do have a question first for Barry, though. Barry, is that a real room or is that a background that you were in?
It's background.
Oh, darn, because I was going to be, can I move into that room? It's gorgeous. So, you know.
Yeah, I think so too. Actually, I'm having new windows installed in the entire house and everything's in a disaster. So I don't want to show the real background.
I thought you were going to say you were going to have new windows installed in your virtual background.
That's next.
Well, the Twitter hack is kind of interesting because one of the things I don't talk about too much is I don't talk about some of like the severe levels of cybersecurity that most people, you know, the 0.001% of the population that I deal with has to deal with. But Twitter right now is saying that the hack that they had occurred because somebody likely coerced one of their employees into providing access. And they provided access to an internal Twitter administration tool. That's what occurred. So from the grand scheme of things, that's what we consider a very inelegant attack. And a lot of times when I talk about attacks and I use the term elegance, I actually have to be very careful and caveat that it's not me trying to show that I am impressed with the hack or, you know, admire the hack. It's a term of art about the level of resources they have to give versus how much they can achieve. And anytime a hack goes after soft targets, you know, such as employees directly using any type of threats, you're in a whole different ballgame that most people are just not prepared to deal with. And that's where, like, for example, we have things like, you know, multiple pins. So for people who are probably familiar with pins and multi-factor authentication, but we use systems where, for example, we have a compromised pin. So we can plug in a second pin, which alerts the administrators, if you will, that we're compromised, so that, you know, we have, you know, protocols for dealing with those kind of situations. So that's really about all that matters out of the Twitter hack. I mean, it was really, really impressive, the people they got, but the technique they used was really very brute force, you know, assuming they did coerce people, as Twitter is saying.
So if I may, and I'll open it up to questions if you want to raise your hand or whatever. So I did hear about the admin, the super admin template, the spear phishing. And, you know, the prevailing view was that it was about money because they went after Bitcoin. They made away with about 170K, which, you know, or was it 70? I don't even know. I think that's subterfuge to get that level of access and to use that so broadly during US daytime seems like they were trying to do a magician's sleight of hand. Look over here, we're earning money whilst they were exfiltrating data.
So
Yes,
I give a whole class called Think Evil, where I actually encourage cyber analysts to think about things evilly and, you know, what can you do with this data that maybe isn't on the face value? And I agree with you completely. If it was about money, they certainly went about it very, very stupidly. They picked extremely high profile people that pretty much guaranteed they were going to get caught and shut down in just minutes. So yeah, I would agree with you completely. And I normally don't like to admit that. And unfortunately this is recorded. So, you know.
Okay, well, that's that. Anybody got any questions? Because you don't often get somebody with that level of experience with a secret pin that says he's compromised. It's good to know, because now I don't trust Kevin any more than I did before. But... And if not, please.
No, I was just going to ask Kevin a question. I'm just wondering about the process of entering the. Is the second pin entered at the same time as the first pin, or is it looking for any entry of a particular number sequence?
It's an alternate pin. So kind of like if you have your ATM card, you have one that actually works, and you have another one that actually works, but also alerts that it's compromised.
Yep. And is that kind of capability generally available, or is it something that requires a fairly sophisticated setup?
I would say it's certainly generally available. The system we use is built on top of the same technology that RSA tokens and Google Authenticator use, but it's certainly not, you know, most people have probably never heard of it because they've never worked in a situation where that kind of scenario is ever considered.
Right.
Gotta say, fascinating. And also fascinating that Simon is so interested in wanting all these details.
Well, no, I mean, because I come across situations where we work with multiple clients, and normally we have a somewhere between 150 and 300 questionnaire that we have to complete before a client will allow us to start working with them, that talks about the way in which we manage data security and also intellectual property security. And so far, we haven't had any questions about this kind of level of sophistication. But I'm just wondering how long it will be before it becomes a standard thing. I don't know whether Sally's got any additional thoughts on this, because J&J are one of the companies that's just unbelievably aware of the risks that are posed by having lots and lots of different people from all over the place accessing very, very sensitive data.
Yeah, our IT questionnaires are extensive. I'll leave it at that. Yeah, we have a whole department. Any partnership we put in place at any type of company at any location, there's a specific group that we work with in the background on IT security.
And there's also the intellectual property protection system that basically all of the major pharma companies have a very, very similar approach, that they want to make sure that these sorts of systems are well and truly in place. 15 years ago, all people wanted was a good quality of insurance coverage. Now they want the insurance coverage and the processes and the systems in place to really ensure that
we will ensure that those companies, CROs, companies that we work with overseas, we require certain security systems on their systems before we will do any research and development with them. And you can imagine, we do a lot in China, and there's a lot of sensitivity to the IT requirements there.
The conflict that doesn't get addressed.
Hi, two people I saw. I'm sorry, I recognize Jim's voice. I apologize, whoever the lady was. I didn't, or if it was, I'm sorry if I got that wrong even. But Jim and whoever it was
Richard.
Yeah.
Okay.
If I can just make a comment, and then I'll leave it to Richard. The conflict that has not really been addressed for quite a while, I've been talking about this, it feels like ad nauseum, is that there is an inherent conflict, in my view, between the legitimate need for privacy and security and the need of the healthcare system to share information. And those two imperatives step on each other at sometimes more than others. I think we're in a really interesting situation right now where HIPAA privacy regulations inhibit the ability of a lot of the public health initiatives to track problems and track solutions and track who's getting better and who's not and that sort of thing. And what I keep looking for are security solutions that are robust but less intrusive. And I feel like I'm waiting in vain, because generally privacy and security people talk about the need to make their tools more robust, which is legitimate. And what doesn't get stirred into that discussion is the need to make those tools easy to use and convenient. In some ways, things like password managers have made some of the password requirements less onerous, but trying to get into healthcare information can be a really daunting task. And Lloyd Brodsky mentioned something earlier about HIPAA safe harbor regulations causing problems. I mean, there's just a lot of tangled issues in there that I don't see people unpacking them.
Jim, speaking specifically to that one, what's been happening is more than just technology. The HIPAA safe harbor rule, which was originally intended to be just that is, if you followed this rule, you were definitely not breaching HIPAA. It wasn't intended to be the definition of where the boundary was. But let me give you a really concrete example. Right now is a current frustration of mine, is that it really took a couple of months for people to figure out that minority and poor communities were being disproportionately affected by COVID. And the primary reason for that is that the CDC case reporting form only required you to put down the state and the county as the location of where the patient was. Well, urban counties are pretty highly populated, diverse places. So like in Manhattan, you have Washington Heights and the Upper East Side. Guess where the poor people live? So if you had actually had the whole concept of privacy poison the idea of being able to locate people, no wonder you can't get stuff out the other side. But from my point of view, a lot of the problem has really been that the attorneys and the policy people don't really want to have a sit down with the IT people, you know, so that my tribe could say, well, okay, if this is the problem you're trying to solve, here's the list of things you can reasonably do.
Richard, I know you had, I'm sorry, you got cut off, so I want to give you a chance to.
Yeah. There's a question back for Sally. Is there a best practices guide for summarizing the kind of questions that folks get asked and answered about IT, both from an IT perspective and a policy perspective? Or is every pharma company developing its own flavor? This seems like it should be an industry-wide standard.
Sorry, I stepped away from my laptop for a minute. Can you repeat the question?
Sure. You know, from all the things that like Simon was saying, the kind of questions he has to answer for every client, it seems like, especially since J&J is considered your leader in this, is there a particular firm you would point to, or is there a particular summary piece, you know, that's a publication that the companies adhere to or try to, or is every company developing its own flavor of this kind of thing?
From an IT perspective?
IT and policy for maintaining both IT security and the policy for, especially around intellectual property protection, because it seems kind of wasteful if every single pharma and biotech has to generate its own flavor of this for when they interact with countries outside of their borders.
Yeah, and again, this is really outside my expertise. We do have dedicated groups within J&J, and if that work with those that go into research and development partnerships with us, or companies that we make equity investments in, and those companies too that we mentor within our JLabs portfolio. We do have best practices, and we certainly work with those companies on those.
Is that available, like as a publication, or is every company, you know, so folks can get their hands on it?
Yeah, you know, I'll have to look into it. That's a great question. If it's something that we do share in the public space.
Well, Richard, one thing you can get your hands on really easily is in this publication 800-53, which is the basis of FSMA, which CMS indirectly requires all health IT providers to comply with. So that gives you a overall framework and a menu of security controls for low, medium, and high security needs. It's an unbelievably influential document. It's just that when you take something like that and try to apply it to specific situations, you get a lot of interpretations.
That's in the chat box if anybody wants to go to that webpage.
And frankly, the other thing you really need to look at is the HIPAA safe harbor rule.
William, you're talking, if you're not talking to us, then that's okay. Okay, he's not talking to us. If he's not listening to me saying you're on mute. I think not. Okay, it's 1:45. I don't want to hold people up on the, it's Joe's jumped in, let's see. Yeah, new wrinkle. Unless there's other questions or other things, I think there's nothing better than giving people 15 minutes back in their day. Certainly, I would like to thank the panelists that are still here, and indeed the team that put that together, Deanne for hosting and moderating, which was fantastic, Linda for pulling this together, and all of the panelists. I think Sally you're the only one that's left, but the others left and said goodbye. So thank you to everybody. I'm a little bit fearful of our social engagement. This is hard enough, but people misbehaving on a social Zoom meeting might be slightly challenging or more challenging for me, but I'll look forward to attempting to deal with that. So unless there's anything left, I will wish everybody farewell. Nice weekend.
Nick,
yes.
a quick one. Hey, thanks again to you. Brilliant.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, just fabulous. You're actually beginning to get the hang of this technology stuff, you know. and I'm sorry, I can't possibly leave a HealthTechNet meeting without saying something rude to Kevin.
Okay, hit me. Well, I will say that, Nick, you do a great job, because I've done it as well, and I look like an octopus trying to run around doing 87 things, and it doesn't work well. And I'm so looking forward to, I think it's the first week in August, maybe the second week. DEF CON was canceled this year. DEF CON is a huge hacker conference, and it's becoming a thing called Safe Mode. So it'll be virtual online.
Yep, I too am.
Yeah, but I'm looking to see what happens. What gets hacked? What moderators? What happens?
Is that where you all hack each other?
Yes, and that's where they hack the hotels and set off the fire alarms for 24 hours at a time.
And a fake ATM to rip off all the PIN numbers and scan codes. If you've never been, it's truly an experience. I'm very terrified. I might actually get a separate PC for dialing in, because it's very risky. Lloyd, if you want to learn how they did the spear phishing for the Twitter hack, that's the conference to go. Otherwise, please, I don't want to hold anybody else up. Thank you, everybody. Have a great weekend. It's always good to see you. I'm sorry it was in virtual, but at some point it will be in real life.
Thank you, Nick.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks all.
Cheers, everybody.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.